Let's now take you to Abidjan, where Professor Kenny Faye, an economic expert, is standing by for more on this story. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I suppose because the federal government has fully repaid its IMF loan, the country is now considered creditworthy. The question many Nigerians are asking, however, is it prudent to go on a borrowing spree now?
The money we paid back to IMF wasn't the only debt. It's just our total debt stock is over $94 billion. And we just liquidated about 4.5, something like that, to IMF because this was borrowed against the COVID area during the COVID time. So that's fine. It just gives us a clean bill of health in relation to IMF lending. But there are others. Now, this particular lending is a lot more serious because you're talking about over $21.5 billion. And then there's also yen, 15 billion yen. And then also there's euro, 2.19 billion euro. And there's a small sweetener of $65 million, which might well go to palliatives and all those social inclusion things. But there are several worries. First of all, there's nothing you can do about pension fund. They attract sovereign guarantee. It's a necessary debt to be paid. You don't want to joke with the morale of the workforce. Pay them their money. So that is not negotiable. That will have to be paid. But there's a second side of it, which is the fact that this borrowing opens up two major issues. It is going to take our debt to GDP ratio to well over 60%. Which is very difficult now. Then secondly, it's going to raise massive issue about debt repayment, debt service. That debt service will now hit the roof. And then at a period when there's dwindling revenue from oil and challenging prices, and we're only halfway on this production statistics. But there is going to be a lot of issues to contend with. But let me tell you what is very critical. We have a subsisting law, which we call Fiscal Responsibility Act 2007. Now, that law governs public finance management. It governs fiscal policies, the medium-term expenditure framework for budget planning. Then it covers debt and debt management. Now, that law has conditions under which you can borrow money. It says it has to be long-term. So we hope that some of these monies are going to be long-term. And long-term, we understand, to be 10 years and above. The law also says you have to borrow on concessionary terms. We don't know as of now what the terms of this borrowing are going to be. Concessionary is reckoned to be 3% or less.
Right.
But I'm not... Yeah, and then also it talks about cost-benefit analysis, which is what is the most critical instrument. What are you borrowing the money for? We need to borrow when we're in a situation where we're finding ourselves. But we have to have a discussion, economic corridor, industrial corridor, commercial corridor, so that the capability of the borrowing to repay the money to service the infrastructure is there. If you wander into the desert or wander to anywhere and build infrastructure and you're never able to pay it, it runs counter to what the law says about borrowing. And then, of course, there is the other critical issue that it says, financial institutions must borrow within the framework, or if not, it will be an unlawful borrowing. So all of these are going to be put on the table. But whether you can borrow or not, the need is there. But it's the prudence around the borrowing, it's the transparency around the borrowing, it's the accountability around the borrowing. I've seen what we wanted to borrow money for, but there's normal things that we will normally borrow money, but we have acid tests that we have to make, we have to institute.
So, as an economic expert, you have established the fact that Nigeria needs to borrow, the federal government needs to borrow, and it is the prudence around it, is how to manage, how to raise the money and pay that is the issue now. You have seen this government in the last 2 years. Are you confident that this government can borrow and repay its debts within the frameworks that you have just laid down?
No, but it just repaid IMF loan. In bullet payment. One bullet payment has repaid IMF loan. See, one of the things that you have to look at is, which is where the alarm bell has to be. If you go and do short-term borrowing, like the Euro bond at 10%, and then 1 year, 2 years, 1.5 years, you use that to service long-term debt that are in concessionary terms, about 3-4%, then you are running into troubled waters. I have to tell you that. It is not prudent. It is not defensible. You can't borrow short-term to service long-term debt. You are heading to financial crisis. So that is one. Then, of course, the second one is what I have said before, that we need to make sure that there is a discussion about the infrastructure you are borrowing money for. And that discussion is around the economic corridor, commercial corridor, residential corridor. You have to have a corridor where economic activities will ensure that it is repaid, it is even maintained. That's the second discussion. And that's what the law is pointing out when the law says you must have analysis. That's what it is looking at.
Professor Ken Ife, we're going to have to leave this conversation there tonight. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. An economic expert. Thank you.